Hello, everyone, and welcome to Saturday's edition of Weekend Waypoints for SEC Extra at D1Baseball.com. Joe Healy here, going to recap Friday's action around the SEC with you, take a peek ahead at Saturday's games. First things first, apologies again for the pre-recorded episode yesterday. My travel schedule just didn't allow for it yesterday, so I had to pre-record. First time I've had to do that, and I'm grateful that my schedule's worked out to where I haven't had to do that very often this season, but just couldn't get around to yesterday. So my apologies there, but we're back fully live today as usual, and will be tomorrow as well. A big Friday around the SEC, so we'll get to that in just a second. But first, a reminder that Saturday's editions of Weekend Waypoints are brought to you by Plains Coffee Company. Plains Coffee Company, a husband and wife team roasting coffee beans in the heart of SEC country. Doesn't get any more local small business than that. Free shipping within the U.S. Plus, if you use the code BASEBALL, you get 10% off of your order. So 10% off your order plus free shipping makes it extremely affordable. And best of all, they do not roast your order until you order it. So the coffee beans arrive on your front doorstep as fresh as they could possibly be. If you or someone in your life isn't a coffee drinker, that's fine. They have tea options as well. So check them out at plainscoffee.com. I always ask that you support the people who support us here at SEC Extra on Weekend Waypoints. Plains Coffee, certainly one of those companies. So plainscoffee.com, use the code BASEBALL for 10% off. Okay, folks, let's talk about the game of the day. It was the second game of the doubleheader between Florida and Tennessee. It is Florida 4, Tennessee 3. As usual, I'll pull up the box score here. Right, there we go. A game Florida had to have, right? I mean, they're in this weird spot where, yes, SEC wins are important, but just as important as the SEC wins are just the overall wins, because they have to be over 500, unless they're going to win the SEC tournament, of course, and make it academic. They have to finish over 500 to be eligible for an at-large bid. So they're kind of in this weird spot where they just need wins. Nick Delatorre, who covers the Gators there locally, tweeted yesterday about how they're still looking for some midweek makeup games maybe for this week, which could potentially help them get over 500. So they're definitely cognizant of it, but they needed this win. Sets up a rubber game tomorrow. Interesting stuff they do on the mound. Pierce Coppola didn't, in case you hadn't heard, Pierce Coppola warmed up for the game that eventually got banged, and he came back out the next day and just didn't feel right, or just didn't bounce back like they had hoped, and so he doesn't start. So Florida's an arm down, but they get good work in this one. Liam Peterson, the freshman who was in the rotation for a lot of the year and struggled really to the ball well with 4 scoreless innings, 1 hit, 2 walks allowed, struck out 7. Fisher Jameson, nice work, and then Luke McNeely had a tough 9th inning there, but he ended up working out of it. Stranded the tying run at second base in the 9th inning. You could see Tennessee got one, couldn't get the other one home there. So good stuff from Florida on the mound in a game in which they needed it. Brody Donay and Colby Shelton home runs. Those are big. 2 guys Florida really needs. Shelton just hasn't been himself this year for a large stretch of time. Brody Donay was largely a part-time player. He's been pushed into full-time duty here lately. And he's kind of responded. I mean, he's playing better. The defense behind the plate still has a ways to go, but it's better. And then certainly when he connects with the ball, he can hit the ball a long way. So 2 guys they really need to come around. Big rubber game today, Saturday. We will talk about that here in just a little bit. All right, so let's catch up on some comments. We already have some rolling in here. Jason Armstrong on YouTube, a couple of questions here. Well, one's a question, one's a statement. The statement is, now would be a good time for the I'll pull this up here. Now would be a good time for the rest of the country to start praying that LSU doesn't pull off a run. Yeah, I mean, they could be that team, right? I mean, it seems like there's obviously Ole Miss 2 years ago is the biggest example, but that's just one example. There are always teams like that, right? That don't play well for the balance of the season, and they just get hot at the right time, and they end up being a team you just absolutely do not want to see in the postseason. LSU could definitely be that. There are a lot of reasons to believe that could be the case. That we've never really doubted the talent, and now some of that talent is starting to shine through in a way that it hadn't before. So yeah, I mean, the rest of the country is probably hoping that LSU doesn't pull it off, and then if they do pull it off, just hoping they don't end up in the same regional. And then Jason's question, Joe, am I the only one who can't tell Peterson and McNeely apart? They look so similar out there on the mound. Gators finding some good pitching down the stretch. Yeah, McNeely had really come on, really started SEC play. He got put in some situations that where he really wasn't ready for them in the moment, but fought through them, and it seems like he's come out on the other end a lot better. Peterson, of course, last night, we just talked about it. Yet they are similar builds, definitely, and similar stuff, frankly. So yeah, you're probably not alone there. I mean, a Gators fan, I'm sure can tell them apart, but yeah, just your average fan. I think I'm with you on that one. Carl Dunn, go Tigers. We coming. What a game last night. Don't let LSU get hot. Yeah, that kind of, you and Jason are on the same page there. There was some weird stuff at the box last night. I guess we'll get into it now because Sean Miller on YouTube says, interesting 4 reviews last night in Baton Rouge and 4 overturned. Not a great night of Aggie defense, but a terrible night for umpiring at the box. Yeah, not a great night for defense in general. I think 5 combined errors in that game. But yeah, the weirdest overturn was a home run, would have been a home run, and it ended up not mattering in the result, which is good because LSU fans might have rioted, and understandably so, if they'd lost that game. But Hayden Travinsky in the 8th hits a what we think is a home run to the left field. It kind of looked funny in real time, like the ball bounced back onto the field. So maybe you think it's off the wall. It gets called a home run. They go to review it. Upon review, it looks like, okay, this is probably going to get overturned. It's probably going to be a double. And lo and behold, they announce it as overturned, and the camera on ESPN2 is looking at Hayden Travinsky, who's kind of like preparing to run back on the field. I think he'd seen the replay. He understands, okay, this is probably a double. So as soon as the umpire says call has been overturned, he kind of sprints out and goes back to second base. But then the umpire goes on to say that actually he's out. And ostensibly, it's because there was a fan in left field that reached over. For those who are about my age, a little bit of a Jeffrey Mayer moment, if you remember that from the Orioles and Yankees playoff series. But so Travinsky's out. I don't know. I haven't done any digging this morning to see if there was what sort of explanations were given. I'm going to be honest. I haven't done any digging on that. Ultimately, it didn't impact the result there. Jay Johnson at post game said, like, hopefully we can get that fan back out to the box, at some point. But yeah, just a weird deal. Didn't see that overturn coming. I had it, truth be told, I was also writing, so the TV was largely, muted. So I know that Kyle Peterson and Tom Hart had some of the same sentiments I have, which is just like, I'm not really sure how it didn't look like the fan touched the ball, but then there's the interpretation that, well, whether or not he touched it, he interfered. And because the ball was theoretically in play, it was a double, not a home run. Did he interfere with the ability to make a catch and therefore he batters out? Like, that could be the interpretation as well. Weird either way, but LSU wins the game. So didn't end up making a difference there. Visa V16 on YouTube. Morning, Joe. Morning to you as well. Hagen doing Hagen-like things now to make sure there's not a letdown after a big win. Agreed. Yeah, Hagen was incredible last night. Ryan Waldschmidt RBI hit, to deep center field was the only thing Kentucky really got. The Arkansas lineup came alive, in particular against the Kentucky bullpen, which has been a concern for Kentucky lately. Hagen Smith, another fantastic start. What's new? Carl Dunn on YouTube also says Griffin Herring is that dude. I will agree with that. He's been arguably the most important player on that entire roster this year. And then the last one before we get back, William Wigington on YouTube says SEC baseball rules. Here to William Wigington on YouTube. Jay in Baltimore on X says, are the MSU Bulldogs teasing their fan base, or are they for real at this point? Could they also be that team that can make a late season run? Yeah, I think now we have to define for real, right? I do think it is still a flawed team when you compare it to A&M, Tennessee, Arkansas, that cohort, right? Because the lineup is not as deep. as you would like it to be. You've got a couple of superstars there. Hunter Hines is coming on really strong right now, but the lineup is not as deep as you would like it. It certainly doesn't compare to A&M's or Tennessee's in that regard. And then the pitching, Cal Stevens been really good. Senja has his moments. The bullpen, a couple guys have really come around. Tyson Harden, Tyler Davis. But again, like you compare that to Arkansas, and it doesn't really match up. So however, I would say they're for real, understanding that caveat of like, look, this is still a flawed team. I mean, yeah, I think they are for real. At this point, they're maybe the fifth best team in the SEC. There's so many teams kind of in that mix, like right around the same spot, right? State and Vanderbilt and Georgia, and Alabama lost obviously to State, so like they've fallen a little bit back, but there's a whole bunch of teams in that group, and State has kind of emerged as the best of the bunch. I mean, they're not a team. If they don't host, they're certainly not a 2 you want to see. But yeah, if they keep playing this way, hosting, as we've talked about a lot the last couple of weeks, hosting could be on the table. I've not checked this morning's RPI yet. I'll refresh it here to see if State's up to 19 in RPI. So yeah, I mean, you're right there. You win this series, I think you're feeling pretty good about that. So I see some more comments. Nicholas, Carl, Sean, let me continue on. I'll get back to y'all next round of reading comments. So hold tight just 1 second for me. We're going to talk player of the day. In the meantime, Billy Amick, 4 for 10 in that doubleheader for Tennessee, 2 doubles and a home run. On the Florida side in that doubleheader, we mentioned Brody Nonay, 4 for 7 with 2 home runs there. That is, sorry, I'm making a note. Like we talked about with Nonay, that's huge for Florida. He is performing right now like the guy they thought they were getting in the offseason, but the guy that he wasn't for the first couple of months of the season. In Georgia's 10-0 win over Vanderbilt, and I saw a question about Vanderbilt in there we'll get to in just a minute. Paul Tate's 3 for 4 with a home run and 3 runs batted in there. Arkansas, with their win over Kentucky 10-3, wasn't just Hagen Smith. Also, Kendall Diggs a big part of it. 2 for 5 with a double, 4 RBIs. He had the big hit. I mean, this was a close game, really into the late innings, at least the middle innings, I guess, the 6th. And Diggs had the biggest hit of the game before Arkansas really broke that thing open. Ole Miss got a big win for its hopes to confirm its spot in Hoover and to keep a tiny, tiny glimmer of hope for a large bid alive with the 11-7 win over Auburn. Jackson Ross had a good game, 3 for 5 with a double and a home run. Andrew Fisher, 2 for 5, double home run, 3 runs batted in. Will Furness, 2 for 4 with a home run, 3 RBIs. On the Auburn side of that game, Carter Wright went 4 for 5. Not a guy who you've necessarily heard a ton about so far this year. South Carolina with the 10-2 win over Mizzou to keep pushing for their own host spot. Cole Messina, 2 for 4 with a double home run, 5 runs batted in. Talmadge LeCroy, 3 for 5 with a double. And then in a losing effort for A&M against LSU, Jace Laviolette, 3 for 4 with a double and a home run. Ali Camarillo, 2 home runs. There are all kinds of guys in the lineup, A&M lineup, who are capable of hitting 2 home runs. Ali Camarillo is not necessarily going to be the first name that comes to mind, but 2 home runs nonetheless. But the player of the day is not Amani Larry, who went 2 for 3 with a home run and 4 RBIs for State, but Hunter Hines. I talked about him getting really, really hot. Just now kind of, again, we talked about Donay being the guy I thought they were getting. Hunter Hines has had just kind of a slightly underwhelming year based on his own high standard, right? We're not comparing him to the average player. We're comparing him to what he was last year and what he was in the Cape Cod League, et cetera. But now he's getting hot. 2 for 2, 2 home runs, 2 walks, 4 runs batted in State's 13-3 win over Bama. That was a 7-inning game, little mercy rule there. But he and Dakota Jordan are, when they're really going, are an incredible 1-2 punch in the lineup. And State might not have the lineup depth of some other teams, but the middle of that order, when they're really going good, can do something like what we saw yesterday. All right, let's get back to some comments here. So Nicholas Doherty asked, trouble for Vandy, or you think, or just a bad stretch? I think they just kind of are who they are. I don't know if it's necessarily a bad stretch. I just think that they're going to get beat sometimes because they're just, Bryce Cunningham has had nice starts. He's also had some tough starts. We saw a tough one yesterday, relatively speaking. Their offense kind of comes and goes. When they're rolling, they can put up some runs, but because they're not as physical in offense, they tend to not put up runs in crooked numbers. So a game like yesterday, 10-0 Georgia in 7 innings is on the table for that team. So I just think it's kind of who they are. And Sean Miller mentions, by the way, Vandy on the road. Wow, gets shut out again and run ruled. They should refuse to leave Nashville at this point. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Sean brings up a good point that a lot of it is coming on the road, that they just have not played well on the road. So I don't know if it's just you say trouble for Vandy. I think it's trouble for them from the standpoint of, if you don't host, you're obviously going to go on the road for a regional. And if you're not playing well on the road, you're going to play a good team, obviously, in a regional. So that's just going to be tough. They're going to have to do something they haven't done a lot of this year. So I just kind of think this is what 2024 Vanderbilt is, for better or worse. We've seen that the floor is pretty high. I mean, they're talented, so the bottom's not going to fall out of this thing like that. But the ceiling is not necessarily as high as it's been in the past, or maybe even as high as we thought it could be this season based on what we've seen. And Schulke, a frequent commenter here and frequent social media liker of various posts for SEC Extra. We appreciate you. Ann says, Hail State, let's go. And Hunter Hines hates baseballs. And I would agree with that. History suggests Hunter Hines does hate baseballs. Don't know what they ever did to him, but he's certainly doling out a lot of punishment. Ace Man on YouTube says 3 Texas A&M errors allowed LSU to win it. Real frustrating game from the Ags defensively. Yep. I mean, certainly not a pretty game there. He also adds, combine that with Braden going 0-10 his last 2 games. Yeah, Braden Montgomery cooling off ever so slightly there. So he was a guy who was, and still is, kind of in that mix for, could he win SEC Player of the Year? I think maybe that ship has sailed with the year Charlie Condon is having. But if you're making a list of guys who are, like the Heisman Trophy, right? Sometimes we know who's going to win it, but they have to invite 4 guys to New York anyway. Like, if we assume Charlie Condon has that award wrapped up, and who knows, we got a few weeks left of regular season, but if we assume he's got that wrapped up, there's still a handful of guys who you'd consider to be in that mix. And I think Braden Montgomery is one of them. But yeah, certainly the last 2 games have not been kind to him. Jeremy Scott on Facebook mentions Roll Tide, and then mentions that Alabama softball won last night in extra innings. So not all was lost yesterday on the diamond for Alabama. All right, let's talk pitcher of the day. Mentioned Liam Peterson, the 4 shutout innings, 7 strikeouts, stuff there. AJ Causey in relief. That Stamos-Causey piggyback situation for Tennessee is working. You got to give it to him. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, Causey's pitching well enough. I think traditionally you just flip him back to the rotation. But again, it's working well enough that Stamos is as a starter, and then Causey comes in and just basically tries to finish it. And if he doesn't, he doesn't. Last night they had to bring in Kirby Cannell late, but that's working. So stick with it. 5 innings pitched, 4 hits, no runs, no walks, 7 strikeouts. Hagen Smith I mentioned, and I have an announcement about Hagen Smith. Because he does this every week, and this week it was 6 innings, 3 hits, 1 run, 2 walks, 14 strikeouts. He would basically be the pitcher of the week every week. Well, he could theoretically be the pitcher of the week every week. So I have elevated him. It's like kind of being elected to the Hall of Fame. I have elevated him to an emeritus status on pitcher of the day here at Weekend Waypoint. So I will continue to mention him, but he is now for the last 3 weekends ineligible to win pitcher of the week, just because, we gotta, mix it up a little bit. We got to give some other folks a chance to get their pitcher of the day honor. So, we'll still talk about him, but he has been retired from the pitcher of the week running here. But another fantastic start for him, jokes aside. A couple relievers. Ty Good for South Carolina continues to be good, no pun intended. 4 shutout innings, 1 hit allowed, 2 walks, 7 strikeouts. And Brad Rudis for A&M kind of helped A&M stick around in that game. 3 shutout innings at the end of the game there to give A&M a puncher's chance there to come back. They couldn't do it ultimately, but good work from him. But the pitcher of the day is Leighton Finley for Georgia against Vanderbilt. 6 shutout innings, 3 hits, 3 walks, 11 strikeouts. A version of Leighton Finley that we really hadn't seen this year. He's been a steady starter. He consistently gives Georgia innings. His ERA was sitting around 5, which is, in this SEC, that's not terrible, but it wasn't, a Friday guy type of ERA. But we saw a version of him even against a Vanderbilt offense that we know has its limitations. That's a version of Leighton Finley that we haven't seen and that Georgia could really use. And it's thought they were getting. I mean, he was a big recruit going into last season, and it appears he's taken a little bit of a step there, which, a lot of Georgia pitchers, it kind of seems like, have taken that step. So kudos to Wes Johnson and his staff for what it seems like has been a turnaround for a decent number of those guys on the mound, even if some of the numbers are still kind of ugly because, it wasn't great to start, and, they're still using a ton of guys, and it's not. I think the future of Georgia's pitching staff will be better than its present once they start, recruiting a different type of guy, or just a better version, or start developing guys, whatever it is. However they get better, I think they will get better in future years. But I think they're doing a really good job this year, just getting it done with what they have. So, and they have high-end talent. We talked about Finley. We talked about Colton Smith, obviously. So there's Brian Zeldin has been great. So there's talent there, but they're making the best of what they got. Okay, before we talk Saturday's game of the day, let's flip back over. Yeah, Sean says, this is funny. Condon not challenged by hitting balls over the fence anymore. So yesterday he cleared the trees 100 feet beyond the fence. Yeah, I mean, that's more of his range. Like if this were like a pickup game, you'd have to say, okay, if you just hit it over the fence, it's an out. But if you hit it over the trees, then you get a home run. But you have to hit it over the trees for it to be a home run. That seems like it would only be fair for opposing pitchers. And Schulke says, it appears the way to set up the Pac-12, Big 12, and the SEC are all going to get 5 host teams for regionals. We all know one is not like the other two. Any chance the SEC gets 6? Yeah, and so the SEC is probably going to get that many, if not more. The Pac-12 and Big 12 probably won't get that many. I think there's probably just a couple in those leagues. I didn't see in our most recent projection, because I'm not a part of the team that puts the projection together. But so I would say, I mean, the SEC got 8 last year. I don't think this is probably a year they're getting that many. Part of the reason they got so many last year was there was this kind of big gulf. There was 8 host teams, then you had Tennessee and A&M kind of right there, but then nobody else made the tournament. This year you've got some teams that are on the bubble. You've got some teams that are kind of clear 2 seeds. So I don't think it's 8 hosts again, but yeah, 6 is certainly on the table. And I wouldn't expect that many from the Pac and the Big 12. Ace Man shouts out Brad Rudis, says, love Rudy. I understand that. I understand how you could. Let's see. Ace Man also says, feel good about the Ags' chances in this series. We didn't play great in the tying run on base. We still have our 3 best relievers ready to go. That's a good point. Ashenbeck, Sadeo, Cortez, and likely clean up the errors. Yeah, I expect it'll be a competitive series. I think you've got a motivated LSU, so I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk for A&M. Although famous last words, maybe they'll run away with things this weekend. They've certainly done that plenty this year, but I suspect we'll get at home a good version of LSU, and I think A&M will play cleaner baseball. William Wigington says, which teams do you think that will not make it in the tournament? If you're talking about the NCAA tournament, we can obviously rule out, the teams at the bottom of the standings, Auburn, Missouri. If you're making me choose between LSU and Ole Miss, they both won games yesterday. I like LSU's team better than I like Ole Miss's, but they're in basically the same exact spot right now. I would probably take LSU over Ole Miss. Alabama's a weird one because their RPI is 15 as of right this minute, but they're 9-13 overall. They've got some work to do. So those are the types of teams I would look for. Florida, obviously, we talked about. So those are the teams that are kind of in that bubble mix there. Auburn and Missouri not making, unless they make it to Hoover and then make a miraculous run. Those teams not going to be in the NCAA tournament. Those I can guarantee you. But Ole Miss, LSU, Alabama, Florida are the teams that are kind of in that interest in that bubble mix that either feel like they have work to do, or will go to Hoover feeling like they have work to do. Carl says all the cheating allegations have quieted down. I just think, Carl, I don't know if they've quieted down, because I think coaches are probably more vigilant right now than ever with that stuff, because we have had a couple of high profile issues the last couple of weeks. I just think it's that those individual situations, there's no real resolution for them right now. So those situations have quieted down. And also because we've had a couple of high profile situations, I think you'd have to be pretty silly to think that right now would be the time to start doing some cheating, right? Because we're all kind of looking out for it and everybody's looking out for it. So I think all those things combined has made it quiet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we hear something again as the season goes along, or if we see in a game, a glove check or any sort of situation where something was brought to their attention during a game. So that could happen. But for right now, I just think it's that, the Maracna situation, that was since he wasn't ejected, they didn't do a glove check. Not much they can do there. And then with the A&M video thing, since we don't know the team involved there, it's kind of hard to follow up necessarily on that one. I'm sure the SEC is doing its own internal investigation. Maybe something will come of that, but we won't know until they do. Jeremy Scott on Facebook, Alabama still in hosting conversation. What do they have to do? Well, I mean, the RPI is in that mix. They just got to win more SEC games. They're 9-13 with an RPI that stays in the top, stays in the top 16. That's step one. But the SEC wins, you have to get to at least 16. And so that means they're going to need 7 more SEC wins. I mean, that's that math's not great. They only have 8 regular season SEC games left, plus a game against Troy, which is not going to be an easy game. Now you also have Hoover, right? I mean, Alabama could go and win some games in Hoover and help itself after that point, but it's a really narrow path for Alabama there. The RPI is fine. They just need SEC wins. All right, we'll wrap up here. Game of the day. It's Tennessee. It's Florida. Xander Sechrist on the mound for Tennessee against Cags for Florida. Florida needs it, like we talked about. Got to stay over 500. They're in that spot where, the RPI is good enough. They just got to stay over 500 and win enough SEC regular season games. And so every single conference game at this point is basically a postseason game for Florida, given that. So that should be a fun one today. Different 2 lefties in the mound could not be more different stylistically. Jack Caglione obviously going to come with the nearly 100-mile-an-hour heat, and that changeup, and Xander Sechrist going to be coming in there at 85 to 88, right? So just very, very different lefties on the mound, but should be a good matchup. I see Larry on YouTube. He says, "Morning, Joe from Houston, my hometown." Of course, did not see game, but LSU still dangerous, and that is a good note to leave it on because I agree, Larry. LSU is dangerous. Nobody's doubted their talent, and maybe now they're playing up to that talent level. We will see the rest of the weekend. That is going to do it for this edition of Weekend Waypoints, production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. Thank you for following along. Thank you for your comments. That's always the most fun part of this deal for me. So I appreciate all of you. Please visit plainscoffee.com if you're a coffee drinker, as I am. Plainscoffee.com, free shipping, 10% off your order using the code BASEBALL. I will talk to y'all again tomorrow morning with Sunday's edition of Weekend Waypoints. Enjoy the baseball, everybody.